Captain Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the training field at Fort Carson, Colorado, watching the morning sun paint the Rocky Mountains gold. At 42, she had 20 years in the Army under her belt. Her shoulders were square, her posture perfect, but her eyes held the kind of weariness that came from proving herself over and over again. Today would be no different. She was here to run a joint training exercise between Army infantry and a visiting Navy SEAL team. Sarah had led soldiers through 2 deployments in Afghanistan and earned a Bronze Star for valor. She'd commanded a company of 200 troops. She'd trained countless soldiers in hand-to-hand combat and tactical operations. But none of that mattered to Sergeant First Class Derek Bronson. Derek arrived with his SEAL team like he owned the place. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and walked with the swagger of someone who'd never been told no. His uniform was immaculate, his boots polished to mirrors, and his smile was all teeth and no warmth. "So you're the Army captain they stuck us with," Derek said, looking Sarah up and down like she was a piece of equipment he was evaluating. "No offense, ma'am, but when they said we'd be working with Army personnel, I expected someone with a little more field experience." Sarah's jaw tightened, but her voice remained calm. "Captain Mitchell, I've been running combat training exercises for 15 years. I think we'll manage just fine." Derek laughed loud enough for his team to hear. 15 years of what? Pushing papers, teaching basic training to kids fresh out of high school. He turned to his men. "Boys, looks like we're babysitting today." The SEALs chuckled. Sarah felt heat rise in her chest, but she'd learned long ago that rising to the bait only made things worse. She'd faced men like Derek before, men who thought a woman in uniform was either a secretary or a diversity hire, never mind her record or her rank. "The exercise begins at 0900, Sarah said, her voice steady as stone. "We'll be running tactical clearing operations in the simulation village. I'll brief both teams in 15 minutes. Derek stepped closer, invading her space. "Tell you what, Captain, how about we make this interesting? Your best soldier against me, hand-to-hand combat. Winner runs the exercise their way." Sarah met his eyes without flinching. "That's not how the military works, Sergeant." "Scared?" Derek's grin widened. "Come on, unless Army captains don't get their hands dirty anymore." The challenge hung in the air like smoke. Sarah could feel the eyes of both teams on her. She could walk away, stick to protocol, and look weak. Or she could accept and risk giving Derek exactly what he wanted, a chance to humiliate her in front of everyone. But Sarah had a third option. "I accept," she said quietly, "but not my best soldier, me." Derek's eyebrows shot up. For a moment genuine surprise crossed his face. Then the cocky grin returned. "You, ma'am, no disrespect, but I outweigh you by 80 pounds. I'm a Navy SEAL. I've trained in 7 different martial arts. I really don't want to hurt you." "Then don't," Sarah said simply. 20 minutes later, they stood in the center of a training mat, surrounded by 24 soldiers from both teams. The morning air was cool, but Sarah barely felt it. She'd changed into her PT uniform, simple gray shorts and an Army t-shirt. No rank insignia, no decorations, just her. Derek rolled his shoulders and cracked his knuckles, still grinning. "Last chance to back out, Captain. I'll go easy on you, but this is still going to be embarrassing." Sarah settled into her stance, knees slightly bent, weight balanced. "Whenever you're ready, Sergeant." Derek moved like a freight train, fast and powerful, reaching out to grab her in what should have been an overwhelming bear hug. It was a classic mistake, underestimating your opponent so completely that you don't bother with defense. Sarah stepped inside his reach, used his momentum against him, and in one fluid motion that took less than 2 seconds, Derek Bronson, Navy SEAL, martial arts expert and walking ego, was flat on his back on the mat, with Sarah's knee pressed against his chest and his arm locked in a hold that would break his elbow if he struggled. The training field went absolutely silent. Sarah leaned down, her voice quiet enough that only Derek could hear. I trained Army combatives for 5 years, Sergeant. I've put down men twice your size. Respect isn't about who's loudest. It's about who's earned it. She released him and stood, extending a hand to help him up. Derek stared at her hand like it was a snake. Derek Bronson didn't take Sarah's hand. He rolled to his feet on his own, his face burning red beneath his tan. The silence on the training field was deafening. 24 sets of eyes watched him, waiting to see what the Navy SEAL would do next. Sarah lowered her hand without comment. She'd made her point. Now it was time to move on and run the exercise professionally. But she could see something dangerous flickering in Derek's eyes, wounded pride mixed with anger. "Lucky shot," Derek muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. He forced a laugh that sounded hollow. "I wasn't expecting the captain to actually know what she was doing. Won't happen twice." "It doesn't need to happen twice," Sarah said calmly. "We have an exercise to run. If you're ready, Sergeant, I'd like to brief both teams now." For the rest of the morning, Derek followed orders. But Sarah could feel his resentment like a physical weight. During the briefing, he asked pointed questions designed to make her look unprepared. During the exercise itself, he questioned her tactical decisions over the radio, loud enough for both teams to hear. "Captain, are you sure you want my team entering from the north? That's a textbook mistake in urban combat." Sarah kept her voice professional. "The north entry provides cover and reduces exposure to the simulated sniper position on the water tower. Proceed as ordered, Sergeant." The exercise went flawlessly. Sarah's planning was solid, her tactical decisions sound. By noon, both teams had successfully completed the objective with 0 simulated casualties. Even Derek couldn't find anything legitimate to criticize. But he tried anyway. "Not bad for a training exercise," he said during the debrief, his tone dripping with condescension. "Of course, real combat is a lot different than playing soldier in a fake village. No offense, ma'am, but most Army officers never see actual action. You learn more in one SEAL deployment than in 20 years of stateside training." Sarah felt her molars grind together. She'd been shot at in Kandahar. She'd held dying soldiers in her arms. She'd made impossible decisions that kept her awake at night even now, years later. But she couldn't say any of that without sounding defensive, without giving Derek the reaction he wanted. Lieutenant James Kowalski, one of her own soldiers, spoke up instead. "Captain Mitchell has 2 combat deployments, Sergeant. She earned a Bronze Star in Afghanistan." Derek's smile never wavered. "A Bronze Star, that's nice. They give those out for all kinds of things." He turned to Sarah. "What you get yours for, Captain? Logistics, administrative work." The lie was so casual, so confident, that for a moment Sarah wondered if he actually believed it. Bronze Stars were serious commendations. Hers had come after she'd led a rescue mission to extract a wounded squad under heavy fire, personally carrying an injured private 300 yards to the evacuation point. But explaining that would sound like bragging. Defending herself would make her look weak. "We're done for today," Sarah said instead. "Dismissed." As the teams dispersed, Lieutenant Kowalski approached her quietly. He was 26, earnest, and had served under Sarah for 2 years. "Ma'am, why do you let him talk to you like that?" Sarah watched Derek walk away with his team, laughing at something one of them said. "Because I'm not here to prove anything to Sergeant Bronson, Lieutenant. I'm here to run effective training exercises. If I spend all my energy defending my record, I'm not doing my job." "It's not right, though." "No," Sarah agreed quietly, "it's not." That evening, Sarah sat alone in her office, reviewing reports from the day's exercise. Her fingers were tight on her pen. The day had been professionally successful but personally exhausting. 20 years of this. 20 years of being the best, working twice as hard, and still being dismissed by men who couldn't see past her gender. Her phone buzzed. A text from Colonel James Rivera, the base commander. My office, 800 tomorrow. Sarah's stomach sank. That wasn't a request, that was an order, and it couldn't be good. She arrived at Colonel Rivera's office at 7:55 the next morning, as was her habit, always early, always prepared. The colonel was a stern man in his 50s with silver hair and a face that looked carved from granite. "Sit down, Captain," he said without preamble. Sarah sat, her spine straight, hands folded in her lap. Colonel Rivera leaned back in his chair. "I received a formal complaint this morning from Sergeant Bronson's commanding officer. He claims you created a hostile training environment, challenged him to personal combat to humiliate him, and conducted the exercise recklessly." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. For a moment she couldn't breathe. A formal complaint against her for defending herself against Derek's disrespect. "Sir," Sarah said carefully, her voice steady despite the anger churning in her gut, "that's not what happened." Colonel Rivera held up a hand. "I'm aware, Captain. I also received testimony from Lieutenant Kowalski and 3 other soldiers who witnessed the incident. They tell a very different story." Relief flooded through Sarah, but it was short-lived. "However," the colonel continued, "this puts me in a difficult position. The Navy is making noise about this. Sergeant Bronson's team leader is claiming you started a confrontation to prove a point. They're calling it unprofessional conduct." Sarah's hands tightened in her lap. "Sergeant Bronson challenged me, sir, in front of both teams. I accepted to maintain order and respect. The exercise ran smoothly and professionally afterward." "I know." Colonel Rivera's expression softened slightly. "Sarah, off the record, you've been one of my best officers for 3 years. Your record is impeccable. But this is about politics now, not truth. The Navy wants this to go away quietly, and they're pushing for some kind of disciplinary action." "Against me?" Sarah couldn't keep the disbelief out of her voice. "A formal reprimand. Nothing that would affect your career long-term, but enough to satisfy them. They want it noted that you engaged in inappropriate conduct with a visiting service member." Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "No, sir. With respect, I won't accept that. I did nothing wrong. Sergeant Bronson disrespected me repeatedly, questioned my authority, and lied in his complaint. If I accept a reprimand, I'm telling every soldier who witnessed what happened that speaking up for yourself gets you punished." Colonel Rivera stood as well, his face hard. "Sit down, Captain, that's an order." Sarah sat, but her jaw was clenched so tight it ached. "I understand your frustration," the colonel said more quietly, "but sometimes we have to take hits for the good of the service. This is one of those times." "Is it, sir?" Sarah met his eyes. "Or is this just easier than fighting back? Easier than telling the Navy that one of their sergeants was out of line?" The colonel's expression darkened. "Watch your tone, Captain." "Yes, sir." Sarah forced herself to breathe, to think. "Sir, I request permission to appeal this decision through the proper channels. I want an official investigation." Colonel Rivera sighed heavily. "That will drag this out for months. It'll make you look difficult, combative. Is that really how you want to be known?" There it was. The unspoken threat that Sarah had heard in a dozen different forms throughout her career. Don't make waves. Don't cause problems. Be grateful for what you have and don't push for more. But Sarah was tired. Tired of being professional while others were cruel. Tired of taking the high road while men like Derek took shortcuts and faced no consequences. "Yes, sir," she said firmly. "I want an investigation." The colonel stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, Captain, I'll forward your request, but I'm telling you right now, this won't end well for you." Sarah stood, saluted, and left the office with her head high. But inside she was shaking. The investigation took 3 weeks. 3 weeks during which Sarah had to continue her duties while everyone on base whispered. 3 weeks of Derek Bronson and his team still being stationed at Fort Carson, running exercises with other units, and spreading their version of events. Sarah heard the rumors. She'd attacked Derek unprovoked. She was trying to prove women were as tough as men. She was unstable, aggressive, had anger issues. Lieutenant Kowalski and several other soldiers gave statements supporting Sarah's version of events. But Derek had his entire SEAL team backing him up, all of them claiming that Sarah had been hostile from the beginning, that she'd goaded Derek into the confrontation. It was their word against hers, 8 men against 1 woman. Sarah knew how this would end. She'd seen it before in different forms, different situations, but always with the same result. The system protected itself. The squeaky wheel didn't get the grease, it got replaced. But she refused to back down. On the 19th day, Colonel Rivera called her back to his office. His expression was carefully neutral. "The investigation has concluded," he said. "No formal reprimand will be issued." Sarah felt a flicker of hope. "However," the colonel continued, "in the interest of maintaining good relations with the Navy and avoiding future incidents, you're being reassigned. Effective immediately, you'll be taking a position at the Army War College in Pennsylvania. It's a promotion, technically. You'll be teaching strategic operations to senior officers." Sarah's hope died. "Sir, that's a desk job. I'm a field officer." "It's a prestigious position, Captain. Most officers would be grateful." "It's exile." Sarah's voice was flat. "You're removing me from active field duty because I stood up for myself." "I'm giving you an opportunity," Colonel Rivera said firmly. "Take it or face reassignment to a much less desirable position. Those are your options." Sarah stood in that office, looking at a man she'd respected, and realized he was just like all the others. He'd stand up for her only as long as it didn't cost him anything. "Understood, sir," she said quietly. "When do I leave?" Pennsylvania in October was beautiful. The trees around the Army War College blazed with red and gold, and the historic Carlisle Barracks had a dignity that Fort Carson's modern structures lacked. Under other circumstances, Sarah might have appreciated the assignment. Instead, it felt like a punishment. Teaching strategic operations to lieutenant colonels and colonels was important work. Sarah knew that. These officers would command brigades and divisions, make decisions that affected thousands of soldiers. What she taught them mattered. But she missed the field. She missed leading real soldiers in real training. She missed the weight of command, the satisfaction of preparing troops for the challenges they'd face. Here, she was giving PowerPoint presentations and grading papers. Derek Bronson had won. That was the truth of it. He'd lied, and the system had protected him, and Sarah had been quietly shuffled away to make the problem disappear. 6 months passed. Sarah threw herself into her work because that was what she'd always done. She became known as a tough but fair instructor. Her classes were popular. She wrote articles on tactical operations that were published in military journals. But at night, alone in her quarters, she felt the injustice like a constant ache. Then, on a Tuesday morning in April, everything changed. Sarah was reviewing lesson plans when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was Virginia. She answered professionally. "Captain Mitchell." "Captain, this is Special Agent Linda Chen with the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. I need to speak with you about Sergeant First Class Derek Bronson." Sarah's heart began to pound. "I'm listening." "I can't discuss details over the phone, but I'm flying to Pennsylvania tomorrow. Can you meet with me? This is extremely important." The next day, Sarah sat across from Special Agent Chen in a small conference room. Chen was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She placed a file folder on the table between them. "Captain Mitchell, you filed a complaint against Sergeant Bronson last year. It was investigated and eventually dismissed." "I remember," Sarah said carefully. "You should know you weren't the first." Chen opened the folder. Bronson has been the subject of 4 previous complaints, 2 from female officers, 2 from enlisted personnel. All were dismissed or settled quietly. Sarah felt her chest tighten. What kind of complaints? Harassment, insubordination, creating hostile environments. In one case, physical intimidation. Chen's expression was grim. The pattern is clear. Bronson targets people he sees as weak, usually women or junior personnel, and pushes until they either back down or get pushed out. The Navy has been protecting him because he's a SEAL with a good combat record. Why are you telling me this now? Because 3 weeks ago, Bronson went too far. Chen pulled out a photograph. It showed a young female ensign with a black eye and split lip. Ensign Rachel Torres. She was assigned to work with Bronson's team on a joint exercise at Naval Base Coronado. When she corrected him on protocol, he lost his temper, put her in the hospital. Sarah stared at the photograph, feeling sick. Is she all right? Physically, yes. Emotionally, she's devastated, but she's also brave. She filed formal assault charges. This time, the Navy can't make it go away quietly. Chen leaned forward. I'm building a case against Bronson, a real case, but I need to establish a pattern of behavior. I need people willing to testify about his past conduct. Sarah understood immediately. You want me to testify? Yes, and I want you to know what you'd be facing. Bronson has powerful friends. His defense will try to discredit anyone who speaks against him. They'll dig into your record, your personal life, everything. It won't be pleasant. Sarah looked at the photograph again. Ensign Torres looked young, maybe 24. The same age Sarah had been when a major had told her she wasn't tough enough for combat command. The same age when she decided to prove everyone wrong, no matter what it cost. How many others had Derek hurt? How many had been silenced or pushed out or convinced it was easier to just accept it? I'll testify, Sarah said, whatever you need. Chen smiled for the first time. Thank you, Captain, but there's something else you should know. I've been authorized to offer you a position with NCIS as a military liaison. Your experience with combat training and your knowledge of both Army and joint operations would be valuable. It would mean leaving active duty, but you'd be investigating cases like this, making sure people like Bronson face consequences. Sarah sat back, stunned. A way out of exile, a way to actually make a difference. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course, but Captain, Chen's expression was serious. When this case goes to trial, it's going to make news. Bronson will be exposed, and when he is, everyone will know that you were right, that you stood up to him when others didn't. That matters. The trial took place 8 months later at Naval Base San Diego. Sarah flew out from Pennsylvania and spent 2 days on the witness stand. Derek's defense attorneys were brutal, just as Chen had warned. They questioned Sarah's motives. They suggested she'd held a grudge. They implied she was biased against male soldiers. They brought up the fact that she'd been reassigned after the incident, insinuating that her own command had found her difficult. Sarah answered every question calmly, sticking to the facts. Yes, Derek had challenged her. Yes, she'd accepted. Yes, he'd questioned her authority throughout the exercise. Yes, he'd filed a false complaint when he didn't get his way. On the 3rd day of testimony, something unexpected happened. A Navy SEAL named Petty Officer Marcus Webb took the stand for the prosecution. He'd been part of Derek's team during the Fort Carson exercise. I watched Sergeant Bronson disrespect Captain Mitchell from the moment we arrived, Webb testified, his voice steady. He was out of line. We all knew it. But he was our team leader and we backed him up because that's what you do. That's what we're taught to do. Webb looked directly at Derek across the courtroom. I'm done covering for you, Sergeant. What you did to Ensign Torres was wrong. What you did to Captain Mitchell was wrong. I should have said something then. I'm saying it now. The courtroom was silent. Derek's face had gone pale. Webb wasn't alone. 2 other members of Derek's team came forward, breaking ranks to testify. They described a pattern of behavior. Derek using his status as a SEAL to intimidate others, targeting anyone he perceived as weaker, especially women. When Ensign Torres took the stand, her voice shook but her words were clear. She described how Derek had berated her in front of junior enlisted personnel, how he'd grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises, and finally, how he'd struck her when she'd threatened to report him. "I joined the Navy to serve my country," Torres said, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't join to be bullied and beaten by someone who's supposed to be on my side." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Derek Bronson guilty of assault, conduct unbecoming, and making false official statements. He was sentenced to 18 months in military prison, reduction in rank to E1, and a dishonorable discharge. As the verdict was read, Derek's swagger finally broke. He slumped in his chair, looking smaller than Sarah had ever seen him. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a bone-deep weariness that it had taken this long, that it had required someone to be seriously hurt before anyone listened. After the trial, Sarah stood outside the courthouse with Special Agent Chen and Ensign Torres. The San Diego sun was warm on her face. "Thank you," Torres said quietly, "for testifying, for standing up. My lawyer said if you hadn't come forward, if you hadn't established the pattern, this would have been much harder."